My name is Wes Kussmaul, and the moment it clicked for me was when I had.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of The Moment It Clicked. I'm your host, Chris Roxas. Truth. It's a fragile thing. Powerful when upheld, but easily bent, twisted, and disguised. We live in a world where our identities, our reputations, even our very words exist behind digital masks. The internet was built to be open and free, but was it ever built to be authentic? Can we ever truly know who's behind the screen? That's exactly what today's guest, Wes Kussmaul, has dedicated his life to solving. He's not just an internet pioneer, he's on a mission to restore trust in a digital world drowning in deception. He helped shape the very foundation of the online world as we know it. As the founder of Delphi Internet Services, the company that popularized the internet, he was part of the first wave that brought the online world to everyday people. As the president of the Authenticity Alliance, Wes is on a mission to answer those questions, to build an internet where trust isn't just assumed, but built into the very fabric of our digital lives. So if you've ever questioned what's real, what's fabricated, and why it even matters, this conversation might just be the wake-up call you didn't know you needed. Let's dive in.
My name is Wes Kussmaul, and the moment it clicked for me was when I had dinner or lunch with Mickey Theodoridis. And we both went away thinking that public PKI was just, there were too many moving parts to actually make it work. But then later that evening or subsequent days, I started to think about that conclusion and said, wait a minute, it's not PKI that's the problem. It's the way it's been deployed that is the roadblock, and that a public PKI can indeed work if deployed properly.
Sure. And so for the layman in the audience, can you explain just a little bit about what a PKI is?
Right. And it's important. So
Absolutely.
PKI is stands for Public Key Infrastructure, which is not a particularly good acronym. As computer acronyms go, they never seem to be very suitable. It's an infrastructure. It is an infrastructure that is built on the same stuff, same construction material, if you will, digital construction material, as blockchain, as SSL, and these days every website has an address that starts with HTTPS, meaning there's an SSL tunnel between your browser and the server. AC is the construction material, the fundamental construction material that stands for for a really scary name, which is why we call it AC, so as not to turn people off and send them heading for the exits. It stands for, are you ready for this? Asymmetric cryptography. Ooh, cryptography. But it is, you don't have to understand the math behind it to understand how it works. So in asymmetric cryptography, subject being identified, which in our case is a human being, but is not always the case, the way PKI has been deployed. Therein lies one of the first flaws in the way it's been deployed. But anyway, everyone who is a participant in this infrastructure gets two very large mathematically related numbers. People think of encryption as something you do with files. You encrypt the file so that nobody can read it without the key. This is a different kind of encryption, and in fact, it's only good for encrypting very tiny files, like 256 bytes or so. But it's immensely useful for authentication, so logging in, for digital signing, so that when you get let's say, a file, a document, a an image, a video, and you want to know that it really came from the person who said it, who claims it sent it, created it, and that not a single pixel or comma or bit has been changed since they signed it. That's what AC does, and it dates back to the 70s. It was invented in the British Signals Intelligence Agency, GCHQ, where decades earlier Alan Turing had shortened World War II by cracking the German Enigma code. So GCHQ was some really crack cryptographers. And this one member of that team, that GCHQ team, named James Ellis, asked a fateful question. He said, because up until that date, for centuries and really millennia, cryptography and encryption consisted of scrambling a file with one key and then unscrambling it with the same key. So somehow you got to get that key
Right.
securely to the person if you want to share an encrypted file, you need to somehow share that key.
Yeah, you need a way to decipher all that noise and be able to put it in something that we as humans can understand, and other computers, cryptographers, I guess, could unlock.
So yeah, that's traditional cryptography. As I say, it's been around for centuries. It goes back to Julius Caesar, actually. And in symmetric cryptography, the same key both encrypts and decrypts. James Ellis said, hey, what if you had a system where you had two keys? Anything encrypted with one of the keys could only be decrypted by the other key. And so he shared this idea with two of his colleagues, and they started ruminating on it and thinking about it. And they thought, well, if I encrypt a symmetric key with, so one of these two big numbers, mathematically related numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything encrypted with one can only be decrypted with the use of the other one. Now they're only good for tiny files,
yeah.
but a symmetric key, is a pretty tiny file.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to, you're on the other side of the world, I have no way of physically getting a thumb drive to you, so that you can trust it really came from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I also don't have time to get it to you, right?
Sure.
What if I encrypt that symmetric key with your public number? I forgot to mention something very important. You have two big numbers. One of them you can give out to others. It's called your public number. And the other is secret, and it never leaves your device. Your phone, your laptop, your tablet, it's secret. And it's embedded there. It never leaves it. Unlike a password, right? So, okay, what if I've encrypted a big file, right? And now I have the encrypted file and the key. And I want to send you the encrypted file, and I also want to send you the key.
Yeah.
Right? How do I do that so that, someone in between can't capture it? And here's how I do it. I encrypt your public number. I encrypt the key with your public number. So you're the only person on Earth who can decrypt that symmetric key, the key that was used to encrypt that file. Now,
okay.
I know that only you can read the file. Of all the people on Earth, you're the only one with that pair of numbers, and specifically with the private number that goes with your public number. So the way Bruce Schneier puts it, he says, it's like you can be in a coffee house filled with mathematicians and start shouting numbers out loud, and by the time you're done, a very specific person on the other side of the room can know the same secrets, and everybody else in the room is clueless. And he says, until about 1980, if you told this to a cryptographer, they would have said, that's impossible. But it is possible. And that's what AC is all about. That's the essence of this technology that has enabled blockchain. It's enabled SSL. We use it all the time, right? And if you think about it, it can put you in control of the use of information about yourself.
Yeah. So about that, like when I'm browsing social media or maybe I see like a news website, sometimes it's tough to sort of sort through what I think is biased news or true news or what's sort of just like planted there. And I'm not really sure what to trust, or like if it was even said by the person who they claim made the statement. So like when there's authentication behind a platform, like is it something that we need to adopt as the users, or is like does every platform need to have some sort of authentication service just so that we know that it came from the person who they said it was? Because there's a lot of weird stuff happening in the world.
Absolutely solves the problem. It solves the problem. And I'm unequivocal about that. However, if you think about it, you've got these two big numbers, right? Assume everybody in the world, all 8 billion people, each one has at least one of these pairs of numbers, two mathematically related numbers. And so you know that you can send an encrypted file to this other person, and you can ensure that when that person says this website is what it is, that it really is, and you can share things in confidence. But there's still one important step that's too easy to overlook, and that is who enrolled them, the other person. Who enrolled Chris? How do I trust this person who gave you those two big numbers? Or, in fact, if it's done right, the numbers are created within your device. So, I, the person enrolling, a notary or whatever, don't even know this number pair. I can have the public number digitally signed by a certification authority, but I don't even know your private number.
Right.
Only you have it. You've got it embedded in your device, and it's such a big number, you can't remember it anyway. So,
yeah, you need to be one of those savants that just is a memory champion and could rattle off infinite digits of pi just to get that into your head.
Right. Yeah. So, but that's the thing. See, this makes it labor intensive.
Yeah.
That's the problem. If you say to a computer savvy audience that you're introducing something that's, that's labor intensive, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Whoa. We're all about eliminating labor intensive processes, not about introducing them. Well, this is a labor intensive process that you can't avoid. However, you only need to do it once. Because once you've got these two big numbers embedded in your device, and there's also a way to transfer those numbers to another device. So you can have the same number pair in your phone and your laptop. Again, everyone in this circle of colleagues, partners, friends, whatever, has to agree on this, this third rail thing, this touchy thing, like authority, centralized authority. Who says that Chris is who he claims to be?
Absolutely. Because I could be, Simon, and I could be auto dealer or something, and I'm not really Chris, the host of the podcast and all this other stuff. Like I could be pretending.
So this is what was wrong with PGP. PGP stands for pretty good privacy, and it was a fascinating story behind it. But instead of having an authority, a certification authority, which is the center of this PKI that we're talking about, right? Instead of having that, nobody likes authority. Sounds like government, sounds like Big Brother, sounds oppressive. We don't want that, right? Mm-hmm. So PGP was a system where I call it a collegial system. So you and a bunch of your friends would all attest to each other's identities. You'd have a physical meeting and you'd digitally sign each other's key pairs, or I don't like the word key pair, number pairs. Right. And that worked. That worked and became a reliable source of trust in collegial groups. Mm-hmm. But then it hit the wall when something was introduced to these groups. What is that thing? What else but money? As soon as money is involved, there becomes an incentive to cook the system, to get a bunch of people together and all attest to some fake identities. And then, you use these, these key pairs, these number pairs, to authenticate to a system, and the relying party, and you or anybody says, oh, I can trust this. They've got a PGP. PGP says that they're who they claim to be. Well, it's,
So then it becomes sort of a flawed system, because now you're just handing your friend the ID or whatever.
It's a thing about good people.
Yeah.
Good people tend to forget what happens when money is introduced into a system. All of a sudden, the not so good people say, oh, here's a bunch of good people. Let me pick their pockets.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like you get the sort of like a tech robber baron, just, holding people upside down and emptying out all their change.
Exactly. It's an old lesson. PKI done right, with an authority that people trust, and trust means two things in this context. Number one, trust the integrity of the enrollment process, and number two, trust that they're not going to act like Big Brother, like bad government, like a dictator, etc., and abuse their power. And that's a biggie. But we have fixed it. Let's see. Let me tell the story, okay?
Absolutely.
How all this came about. All right. The revelation occurred to me when I had dinner with a friend. He's actually a friend of my daughter. She told me that he was thinking like I was thinking, you should get together, and so I had lunch with him. Um, and that's when, after that lunch is when it occurred to me that what we had in Delphi in the early 80s, okay, I was in social media in the 80s. We had accountable anonymity. Nobody got to know who you are or anything about you, but you were accountable, right?
Right.
If you,
That's huge.
yeah, and okay, now I've gone back to the 80s. So all right,
Yeah,
1981, I created the world's first online encyclopedia, also the world's worst business model. So it morphed rather quickly. We added social features, email and chats and bulletin boards and things like that, and we discovered, that we had something viable in social media, and it was called Delphi. With Delphi, you could assert your identity without disclosing your identity. Make yourself accountable, but not trackable. And if you think about it, there's a perfect model for that in the physical world. It's your car's number plate, right? Anyone can see it, making you accountable for what happens on public roadways. But nobody gets to know the identity of the driver or owner unless there's been a fender bender, or the cops have reason to suspect you're carrying, drugs or weapons or something like that. But as long as there isn't an incident, you're accountable without being trackable. And so we had that at Delphi, and we did, we had cases where someone said, this person has defamed me, they've slandered me, they've cheated me, I need to know who they are. And I'd say, well, we need a court order. Produce a court order from a legitimate court, and we'll disclose who it is. We even had visits from the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, for those who aren't in the USA. And they'd say, this person's been dealing acid online. We need to know who they are. We'd say, well, you got a court order? They'd say, we're the DEA. We need a court order. We said, yeah, you need a court order. So they'd go get a court order, and we would disclose who this username represented.
Right.
But until then, there was no. Anyway, fast forward, sold Delphi to Rupert Murdoch's News America Corporation. And that's just as the web was coming along. It was 1993. This new thing, the web, social media based on the web. Anybody can be anybody. The famous cartoon. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog. The Peter Steiner cartoon. And I set out to find a way to bring accountable anonymity to the web. And I was thinking, PKI, this thing based on AC, asymmetric cryptography. Somehow there's got to be a way to do that.
So why do you think it's not more widely adopted? Because I feel like there's a lot of anonymity with not a lot of accountability on today's internet.
Exactly. And the answer to that question is very simple. So what we call Syllabandia, the technology, the industry that consists of Silicon Valley, plus the broadband and media industries, plus their feeders. And in feeders, I include the dark web, the botnet industry, but also the venture capital, private equity, and cybersecurity industry. Cybersecurity is it's growing at 14% a year. Why? Because as long as it's needed and it doesn't work, people will continue pouring money in the hopes that,
and one day
maybe,
that it will work.
yeah, right.
Yeah, maybe it's like a resources problem. So then they're just dumping gasoline onto this thing that may or may not actually, get the result that they are really seeking.
But that's merely a $230 billion industry.
Yeah, merely 230 billion. Yeah.
Silabandia is a $1 trillion industry. Again, Silicon Valley plus the broadband, the internet networks, plus the media industry. What do they make? How much revenue is generated by breaking into your information home and helping themselves to your information about you and selling it and making money with it?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's a $1 trillion industry, $1 trillion of revenue. What would happen to that $1 trillion industry if you were able to lock away information about yourself, declare it legally your personal intellectual property, and license it only to people that you choose to license it to? So, for instance, your personal information, name, rank, serial number, name, address, social security number, etc. Let's say you need a new set of tires for your car. You license your name, address, car's VIN, vehicle ID number of miles you drive, the type of driving you do, all the stuff that a tire vendor wants to know in order to pitch you a set of tires, right? You license that to this sphere, we call them sphere, called tire vendors. They can know all this about you, only under NDA, they agree to use it only for the purpose of selling you tires. Then once you buy the tires, you revoke that group license. You say, no more, you can't have that information anymore. If you have stored it, I can't force you to delete it, but you can't use it for anything until I go out to buy another new set of tires.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it works. It's called MOI, My Own Information. It's your personal information vault. It is, picture a file cabinet with 3 drawers. The top drawer is actually Tim Berners-Lee's solid pod, which is something that does what I just described, only doesn't use PKI. And it's for structured information that fits in fields. So like your name and social security number, things like that. The second drawer is unstructured information that is your property, but it doesn't fit into fields. So for instance, videos, your movie script, your the novel you're working on, all that stuff goes into the middle drawer. And then a bottom drawer is information you have in your possession, but which you don't own. So for instance, the files you use for work. All of this, the first 2 drawers are called your biographical reference work. And as long as it's a work, it can be subject to copyright. And so we give you the tools to claim copyright and also the protection of secrecy law. It's usually called trade secrets law, but it can be used by an individual as well as a company. And now you've got the tools to own and license information about yourself. So it's got legal components as well as technical components. Now, how did I get here? I was talking about lack of accountability on the web, and after that lunch meeting, actually leading up to the lunch meeting, but especially after it, said, this can be done with the public PKI. I'm going to write a book about this. And these books behind me are based on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
go ahead
this
and
one,
show
Quiet
it off.
Enjoyment. That's the second edition of Quiet Enjoyment. I started writing Quiet Enjoyment, and some people at the ITU, International Telecommunication Union in Geneva, a United Nations agency, heard that I was writing this book and said, "Hey, we're building something that resembles what you're advocating." And so I worked with them for a couple of years on this World PKI system, um, and we rolled it out to the member states of the ITU in late 2004, and they hated it because they saw it as a threat to. So half of the nations in the world already had a certification authority, had some kind of government PKI system, and they had the certification authority, national certification authority, and along comes the ITU saying, "Hey, here's one for the whole world." And the question is, oh, does that mean my country's certification authority is subordinate to yours? And the answer is yes. And then the answer is get it out of there. Pull the plug on it. Don't do it. We would not buy into that. So the two gentlemen who were responsible for this thing called the World E-Trust Initiative took me aside and said, "Wes, can you? We have a mandate. We have to discontinue the World E-Trust Initiative. Would you take it?" And not, it can't be called the ITU's World E-Trust Initiative, but can you take the whole idea and craft it outside of the ITU? Because I wasn't an employee. I was just a volunteer contributor to the program. Um, and
was that intimidating? Like that must have been a lot to take on if you're just sort of contributing. Like, or did you feel prepared in that moment?
I have a habit of taking on things that are much bigger than I anticipate.
Yeah.
So that's how I get in trouble.
Yeah, it's how we get in trouble. I think it's also how we get a lot more done than we think we're capable of. We take on these tasks and we're not fully aware of what it involves, and then it sort of forces us to become a bigger and better person, even if it makes us also want to, even if the weight slowly kind of crushes us, we learn to lift the weight.
Yep, precisely. And there's a lot of stories like this. I mean, how many people, how many entrepreneurs or CEOs, when they're asked, how'd you get into this? How'd you start this? Company founders, and they say, they'll often say, I had no idea what I was getting into. It was naivete.
Mm-hmm.
So it's ultimately it's a beneficial trait, but
yeah, absolutely. It's sort of the blessing and curse of ambition. We take on something huge, and we don't know what we don't know yet, and we might regret it if we don't go for it. But then going forward, we just have to take it on. We just have to take on the big challenge, take on the big problem, because we see something in the world that needs to align with our vision, and we just go for it.
Exactly. That was it. So I said to Hamadun Touré and Alex Muntoko at the ITU, I said, I'll do it, but I wanted to take the form of a municipality, because people understand the role of City Hall. They don't know what a certification authority is. They don't know what a PKI is. Not only that, but it involves law. It involves methods from the physical world. It's not just a computer thing, which, at first they were a little reluctant to go that way, but that was basically condition of going forward, and after a while they bought into it. So that was on March 7th, 2005. We just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the chartering of the city of Osmio at ITU headquarters in Geneva. As I say, March 7th, 2005. It is a certification authority to the world. And we have a server in Geneva. Geneva is, well, Switzerland is the place where you want a server because Swiss privacy laws are really substantial. An enrollment program and the notaries, attestation officers, we call them, from the Council of Attestation Officers, which is an enterprise based in Virginia. That consists of attestation officers. These are Virginia online notaries. Virginia was the first place on earth to allow notarial processes to take place online. So these people are both civilly and criminally liable for what they do. They've got the force of Virginia law behind them. They're vetted, and they will interview you, and you've already gone through a verification process, email and SMS check and a document and liveness check before your interview, and then you go to your interview and your attestation officer. You have an attestation officer assigned to you, and they will, or you can choose one. And they'll ask you, for instance, log into your bank account, show that there's a bank account in your name that you have access to. Log into, eBay, PayPal, your employer's network, other evidence, produce other evidence of identity, and they will score your evidence of identity on a score of 0 to 72. There are 8 metrics used, each on a scale of 0 to 9. So they will score those 8 metrics and add them up, and you've got a score, 8 of 0 to 72. And that's how you can gauge how much you can trust, not whether to trust,
right,
but the degree to which you can trust someone you meet online. What is their identity reliability score? If it's 12, that means, okay, you can trust them to comment on your blog, and you can trust them to put comments on your blog without trolling and something at that level. On the other hand, if you want to trust them with your nation's nuclear codes, you probably want something closer to 72.
Yeah, you'd probably want a perfect score for that if they're getting full nuclear codes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you take me back to the founding of Delphi and the Kussmaul encyclopedia? How did that come about? Like, how did that even get started? Like, what was the story behind that?
Okay, going way back, I got out of the Air Force and went to work for Liberty Mutual Insurance Company as a programmer analyst. And as you can imagine, 3.5 years in an insurance company is it's a bit cloistered. And I went out into sales. I was at the time working at Tektronix, and I made some money in the stock market, and thought I had all the money I would ever need to start a business. I was contemplating 2 possible businesses. So one was a CAD/CAM system, and the other one was an online encyclopedia. And someone that I was dating at the time said, I don't know what this CAD/CAM stuff is about, but it sounds pretty boring. That encyclopedia sounds like fun. I think you should do the encyclopedia. Thought about that for a while. I said, man, she's really right.
Yeah.
So I had friends at the MIT Joint Computer Facility. This is not the same as their CSAIL lab. This is not highfalutin AI. This was just basically, computer services for students and administration. But we used their VAX system. I licensed the text for the encyclopedia from a guy named Max Shapiro, who was elderly and told me that he's happy to license the text, but I don't think computers can handle letters, only numbers. I don't know. How are you going to do that? I said, okay, well, Max, we'll find a way. And so, and I wrote the retrieval code. I called it TextReave to manage the encyclopedia. It didn't work. It turned out to be a frustrating experience. But a friend at MIT, Phil McNeil, had a brainstorm. I said, what if we make every article in the encyclopedia a file and give it a file name that is the title of the encyclopedia article, and then we just use, basically VEX print or type command and just and turned out to work beautifully. It was the
amazing,
simplest, shortest code imaginable, and so that was the encyclopedia.
Yeah, and so that was 1981. What was it like seeing the internet get more and more popular? Because I know back then there were a lot of skeptics as to whether the internet was just a fad or if it was useless or not. Like, because you could listen to the radio as opposed to listen to a podcast, or you could, watch TV as opposed to watching a video before. This was much before video, but like what was it like seeing the rise of the internet and being a major part of the movement that popularized the internet? Like, how did that feel? Like, what did you experience at the time?
Well, I mean, the biggest, it's very exciting. The whole thing was exciting. I mean, I started, when Delphi gained traction in 1982, late 82, I knew, so the encyclopedia morphed into Delphi. We stopped supplying the computer. That was a biggie. Stopped supplying the computer, and with it, we stopped committing to unlimited support. What we found is that we were selling this encyclopedia with a computer, with a modem, with everything, and we found that, this is 1981, 82. Parents wanted computer education for their kids, but the classes were all book solid. And then they discovered, oh, we can get a computer and unlimited tutoring. So, phone call first thing in the morning, and they basically, that phone call was their computer tutorial. So anyway, that was among the many big flaws in that business model. But social media, it became in 82.
So that must have been one of the first social media platforms ever back then. Like,
there were three of us, and we were actually the third. We were not the earliest. So Reader's Digest had something called The Source. There was CompuServe, which made use of the excess capacity on H&R Block's computers, and then us. The source was easy to compete with because they were paranoid about liability. For instance, only 2 people could be in a chat. They couldn't allow more than 2 people in a chat because, liability,
Right.
But CompuServe was a considerable competitor. So we put Reader's Digest out of business. We basically raided their user base.
Yeah. Well, that's how you do it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the nice thing about social media. They're your customers right there for you.
Yeah. So what was the business model for a social media platform back then? Because nowadays it's mostly advertising. So people paid to be part of the platform?
Yes, absolutely. So we started out pay by the minute, and then we went to a pay by the month model. There are variable costs associated with it, especially in those days, because people don't realize there was a protocol before TCP/IP for internetworking. It was called X25. And I called it the business protocol, and TCP/IP was I call it a folk protocol. So TCP/IP sort of rose from the ground up. Hackers and hobbyists came up with it. Bob Metcalf, I guess, was the chief architect of TCP/IP. But there were these Telenet and Tynet, TYMNET, and a few others, and national networks elsewhere were based on this X25 protocol. And X25 called for error checking between nodes. So anytime a set of packets went from one node to another, do error checking. And you can just imagine if it gets popular, develops a lot of traffic, the network effect, all of a sudden there are more nodes. And every one of them is error checking instead of with TCP/IP, it's the endpoints, right? The endpoint says, says to the sender, here's my checksum or whatever error checking protocol you use. Is that right? The server says, yeah, that's right. Okay, done. So X25 was not scalable, absolutely not scalable. And everybody moved to TCP/IP with internet proper. Another thing that happened was up until around 91, the internet backbone this is another good story. The internet backbone was run by the National Science Foundation, and they had a commercialization rule. Basically, they copied ham radio, and that was no commercial activity on this network whatsoever. You couldn't even tell a friend, hey, I've got an apartment that I need a sublet. Are you interested? Or not tell, a group, because that was considered, commercial traffic. What happened was a couple of guys in Aurora, Colorado said, this TCP/IP based network could get really big. This could be really exciting. Let's Phil, Jack Rickard and Phil, a guy who used to be a disc jockey in Colorado. Anyway, they said to the NSF, well, we really need to allow commercial traffic. So I'll tell you what, we'll run this backbone and you run that backbone. And when you get commercial traffic, you just send it our way. And NSF said, well, how are we supposed to do that? And they said, well, that's your problem. And it was really calling it a
Mhm.
backbone
Yeah.
it was called
Mhm.
no, not Kixnet. Anyway, their backbone was not a high traffic facility, and the whole thing was concocted just to force the NSF to throw up its hands and say, all right, we're out of
Mhm.
here, and then it became a free for all, and anyone could run internet nodes,
Mhm.
and that's when it took off.
So, if you could give one piece of advice to the next generation of internet pioneers, people who will shape the future, what would the one or two major pieces of advice that you would give them?
That this issue of accountability is only going to get worse or more important. Solving the accountability problem is where the opportunities lie. The very same construction material called AC that you use in blockchain and you use it in SSL, you use it all over the place. The key to it is deploying that technology properly and considering the demands of the real world, considering how problems of accountability have been solved in the physical world for decades and centuries and millennia. Be inspired by those models, by the physical world. And I often tell our team members, forget you ever heard the word software and computer. Just think buildings, and
Right.
there's
Make
where
it
the
real. Make it
opportunities
tangible.
lie. Syllabandia is $1 trillion industry, and cybersecurity is a $240 billion industry. You don't have to make, $1.2 trillion
Right.
in revenue to have a very nice business.
Absolutely. And so, do you think the internet can still be fixed, or do you think that we're still too far down the rabbit hole of manipulation, misinformation, distrust?
There is nothing wrong with the internet. It's the way we use the internet. It's the problem. And here's what I mean by that. And it's really pretty simple. The internet was characterized as an information highway, and that still fits. So what is a highway but an outdoor public transport system? How do we typically use highways? Well, we typically use them to go from building to building, from indoor space to indoor space, from our residence to an office or a shopping mall or whatever. So where are the buildings? Right? Where are the digital buildings? The answer is, where are the digital indoor spaces? What is a building but a set of accountability spaces, right? You tend to know who's in a room with you in the
Right.
building, right? That's what they're about. They're about more than climate control. They're about accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since, the whole web crowd in early 90s said information was meant to be free and we don't need constraints, and constraints are bad and Big Brother is bad and this is a way we can have freedom. Well, yeah, outdoors is an open and free space and we all love the outdoors,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't let our kids hang out by the side of the highway. We don't have our meetings in a rest area by the side of a public roadway. We don't keep our files, by the side of the highway. We keep them in buildings. We let our kids, young children, play in buildings. If they're outside, they're in a bounded space.
Yeah. They're in the yard. They're not, walking down some shady street in the middle of the night.
Right, right. It's really simple. The internet does its job well, and that job is the job of a roadway system. It's a marvelous roadway system. I can't think of much that's wrong with it. But the problem is lack of indoor spaces.
Right.
Simply.
Yeah.
We don't have them. We need them. And
So,
PAI, AC is the construction material for digital building.
gotcha. Yeah. And so, um, wrapping up, what's something that you're working on that hasn't quite clicked for you yet? Like, what's something that you're still trying to do in your own life that you're still trying to figure out?
How to recruit entrepreneurs. So we have a platform, right? We have servers, we have software, we have business plans, we have an equity allocation system. You know, you've got an idea for a building, something or other, we'll do the incorporating for you, right? What I haven't figured out is what can be called franchising, although there's legal baggage that goes with that word, right? How to sell a restaurant concept to someone who wants to run their own business that's known and established, but it doesn't require a lot of it calls for a different kind of entrepreneur than someone who wants to build an secure online facility, right? I had a friend and neighbor and mentor. His name was George Hatsopoulos, who had figured out how to do this. He was the founder of Thermo Electron Corporation, which became Thermo Fisher. And he found a way to take ideas bubbling up from among all the engineers in his company and get them to write a business plan and then launch their business. But Thermo Electron owned equity in it, and Thermo Electron, you know, these engineers thought they knew how to run a business, but they didn't. So George Hatsopoulos and his brother John basically provided the accounting services and the legal services and the marketing services and all the basic business blocking and tackling. But when it came to identifying the market and pursuing the market for this new application of Thermo's core competencies and intellectual property, his licensee was on their own. In fact, there were cases where Thermo and their license, you know, their Thermo spinoff company would find themselves competing in the market. And George's response was, well, may the best one win, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, and that was astoundingly successful. There were 24 Thermo companies on the public exchanges, and every one of them was profitable.
Wow.
Now, what happened after that is George got on in age. He passed away, I guess, about 5 or 6 years ago, and sort of lost control of things. And Wall Street saw this as a marvelous IPO machine. Let's craft more of these Thermo companies, you know, and you know, the results discredited the whole idea. But when George and John were in charge, it was an incredibly successful plan and process. So we're trying to emulate that. We still need to find the secret to recruiting entrepreneurs the way franchisors recruit franchisees.
Right. And final question. What's something that you've done recently that you have figured out, a moment that clicked? What's something that you're proud of?
I'm proud of the whole thing. I'm proud of.
There we go.
Proud of the quiet enjoyment infrastructure. By the way, Authentiverse.net is a great starting point. See the whole thing. It's a very brief video, followed by more videos.
Absolutely.
And Authentiverse.net, I'm very proud of, and I'm proud of the team. Proud of the team that we've assembled that is caught on in the face of, a world that is in the habit of thinking, no, the web is it. That's all we're doing is fine tuning now, and the assumptions that we run up against that we have to say, no, wait, no. But they do it, and they're good at it, and they get better every day. We all get better every day, and I'm very proud of them.
Mm-hmm. You helped popularize the internet as we know it. You came up with the first commercially available digital encyclopedia, and now you're on a mission to create more real authenticity with accountability in the modern internet. Tell the people where they can find you, and tell us about your projects. Where can people learn more about you?
Authentiverse.net. That is a new continent. It's a digital continent. Authentiverse.net will take you on a flight through this new continent and explain how it works, both in that initial flight video, which is less than 2 minutes long, and it takes you to another series of videos and other resources that explain how it all works. And I particularly recommend Evolution. There's a video that you will get to in there called Evolution that, again, in 2 minutes shows how all these pieces work together. AC, PKI, public key cryptography, then public key infrastructure, then PKI done right, and then on up, and how all of this fits together. So that's what I recommend. Go to authentiverse.net, follow it through.
All right, you heard him, authentiverse.net. Thank you, Wes. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Chris. This is very enjoyable.
And that was our conversation with Wes Kussmaul. Trust. It takes years to build, seconds to break, and a lifetime to repair. If trust is eroded by deception, deepfakes, manipulation, what happens then? And that's why conversations like this matter. That's why people like Wes Kussmaul are fighting to restore authenticity online. Because a world without trust isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous. So if today's conversation sparked something in you, if it made you rethink the way we navigate the online world, then maybe, just maybe, the first brick of a stronger bridge has been laid. I'm Chris Roxas, and this has been The Moment It Clicked. See you next time.